Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Warp Core podcast. It is I, Urza Master. Joining me, as always, Lord Uther and Fert Derby.
Hi.
Welcome. Welcome, gentlemen.
Why aren't you asking me how my week is? I'm waiting for that.
Well, we have a lot to talk about in this episode this week that might define how your week was. We're talking The Way to Eden. Probably one of the more unsuspecting entries in late Season 3 Star Trek, the original series. Something of a roller coaster of a season, but Fert Derby, take us back behind the scenes through the silence that was The Way of Eden.
Thank you, Ursa. Thank you, Uther. Thank you, Warp Core fans. We're going to follow The Way to Eden, which first aired on February 21st, 1969. But before we talk about the specifics of this episode, we should note that the story is the final credit in the original series for former showrunner, and contributor DC Fontana. DC has been talked about on the Warp Core for her contributions many, many times. And she got her first notice on all the way back on Warp Core number 30 with Charlie X. She also gave us Tomorrow is Yesterday, This Side of Paradise, Journey to Babel, Friday's Child, By Any Other Name, The Ultimate Computer, The Enterprise Incident. All of these can be found in the archives for the Warp Core with varying degrees of success. But there's no doubt that she is a pivotal voice of Star Trek, not just in the original season, but also she would later go on to help craft the early voyages of the NCC 1701D in Star Trek The Next Generation. So this was her final screen credit. And of course, she didn't take the screen credits because they rewrote her script so many times, and it was so radically different that she chose to use her preferred pseudonym, Michael Richards, which, as we've established, is not the bumbling Seinfeld stand-in supporting character neighbor Kramer, but it was in fact what DC wanted to go by when she didn't want to go by her Christian name. So we have a story by Michael Richards, aka DC Fontana, and the actual episode's writer, Arthur Heineman, did the teleplay. Mr. Heineman not only co-wrote the songs you hear in the episode with Charles Napier and guitarist Craig Robertson, he also scripted a Season 3 episode that we found quite favorably here on the Warp Core podcast, Wink of an Eye. In Warp Core 76, it's the one where the aliens are moving faster than the speed of eye, and Kirk has to try and get the word out to the crew who is stuck in real time. And it was actually quite fun. This would be the second of 3 episodes Mr. Heineman will do. And friends, we are down to our final 4 of the original series. That's right, there's only 4 original missions left in both Season 3 and the series run after today. So buckle in for those final furious flights of fancy that was Star Trek, the original series. We should also mention the director. I know we kind of have to. His name is David Alexander, and this is not the first time you've seen his work. In fact, he did Warp Core's 75th edition, Plato's Stepchildren. Now, if you want to remember that episode favorably, you remember for the barrier-breaking, groundbreaking kiss between William Shatner and Nichelle Nichols, Kirk and Uhura. And if that's the only thing you remember from that episode, you're going to be in a good place. Because the rest of that episode was pure dreck. It was the Enterprise crew being forced to ride around each other on horses, dressed as pseudo-Greek Shakespearean characters, and spout some of the most inane and embarrassing dialogue that for Season 3 or the entire run of the series. If you want to hear how much we disliked Plato's Stepchildren as a group, check out Warp Core number 75 and Mr. Alexander. Fortunately, friends, he does seem to have taken some notes And I'm happy to report that, if nothing else, The Way to Eden is less dragging your nails down the chalkboard, wince-inducing, than its predecessor. We had Charles Napier as the most musical inclined of the space hippies. This was one of his first big roles. And you know who Charles Napier is. You've seen his work. You probably just didn't remember it. He was a character actor, worked well into the early new millenniums. But he probably best is remembered for his roles in The Blues Brothers as the angry country musician chasing Jake and Elwood across the country in an RV. He was Murdoch, whom John J. Rambo was determined to come and get when he was imprisoned in Vietnam in Rambo First Blood Part 2. The man who pulled the plug on Rambo and tried to leave him for dead. You know how that worked out. He also did a bunch of pictures with Jonathan Demme, beginning with Something Wild, Married to the Mob, The Silence of the Lambs, Philadelphia, the remake of The Manchurian Candidate with Denzel Washington. He was in Austin Powers 1 and 2, if you're a fan of the Mike Myers 60s spy trilogy. And he got to come back as a general in Star Trek DS9's Little Green Men, on which he did not bare his chest or pick up a guitar. And when we do DS9 Little Green Men, which is the crew getting transported, I believe, back to 1947 Roswell, New Mexico, you'll be in for a treat when we discuss that there. So Charles Napier, he would go on to do great things. To his credit, he gave it his all. He won this audition by jumping up on a table and belting out the Animals' The House of the Rising Sun, which apparently impressed the producers and intimidated the other actors auditioning, and that's how he got the gig. As far as this episode goes, the reason DC Fontana took her name off of it is that it was originally titled Joanna, and the premise was that Dr. McCoy's daughter would be one of the space hippies who ended up falling for Captain Kirk. And there was going to be this uncomfortable romance, kind of like what they alluded to in the Lethal Weapon franchise between Roger Murtaugh's daughter, Rhiannon, and Martin Riggs. But as they pruned that subplot from the features, I guess they didn't like the idea of making McCoy, creating a rift or a wedge between McCoy and Kirk on this. So they rewrote and rewrote and rewrote, and they turned Joanna into Irina and then made her a romantic foil for Chekhov. And darned if that didn't actually work, because for the first time we get Pavel, we get some much needed context with him. As far as, he's not just this ensign who keeps getting hurt. And on a quick side note on that, I've discovered a new Star Trek trope. I can't say I'm the only one who probably picked this up. It just took me a long time to do it. Why was Chekhov always the one getting injured? Particularly in the features. He ends up getting burned by V'ger in the motion picture. He ends up getting earworms of the worst kind in The Wrath of Khan. He ends up needing brain surgery in The Voyage Home, and here he touches a tainted flower on the so-called Eden planet and gets acidic burns on his hand. I mean, I guess they're just like, we need a crew injury, but we're running out of red shirts. Give it to Chekhov. So I don't know when that started. It probably started here, but an interesting Star Trek trope nonetheless. Anyways, the relationship between Irina and Chekhov, and the premise that the cult hippie leader would somehow infect, he's a carrier for a rare space disease that could, obliterate entire cultures and civilizations and species if he were, quote, free to roam. And the fact that he refuses to get treatment or doesn't believe in treatment and so forth, that is pure Trek, friends. And that's really where the focus of this episode for me was. It wasn't the extended musical interludes, which, again, I could have removed all of those and just had this premise of non-authoritarian figures who are rebelling against everything that their parents and Starfleet believed in and want a better way forward, and that Spock can somehow speak their language. He can jive with them. Like, that's good Trek. Like, that's what Star Trek is supposed to be, that we've been championing all along. So as a result, unlike, say, Plato's Stepchildren, which is just buried in artifice and forced comedy and other zaniness, this one, I think, speaks to some of the core dramatic conundrums and provocative questions that we want our show to do. So instead of rejecting it for its somewhat corny and campy / cheesy musical elements, which, let's remember, it's 1969 and they are trying to put a mirror up to the society at that time, so it probably played better in the era of Woodstock and free love than it would in 2024. I can set that aside and see that this idea of this man who has people, following his every move, and his stubbornness could lead to, cataclysms, and trying to convince him, of the error of his ways. I think that's good Trek. I could have done without the chanting of Herbert, which to my older ears at first sounded like pervert, and I couldn't understand what they were all going for there. Herbert, Herbert, Herbert. But again, we can go ahead and slice through it and pick out the things we didn't like. But I'm going to take a 10,000-foot view here, gentlemen, and say that if you can scrape away some of that unpleasantness, there's actually a really good episode buried in here, or at least the underpinnings of a really good episode buried in here. Were you lost or found on the way to Eden?
I kind of waffled on this one, and I'm going to be real. The Herbert thing reminded me of some of the parts of prior episodes that I really didn't like. And I forget which episode it was exactly, with all the children.
And the children shall lead them?
I don't think it was that one necessarily, where they find him on the planet.
Oh,
all their parents are dead.
That was I think that was a second season Miri, yeah.
Yeah, it reminded me of that in the worst way. I also kind of the kind of like brush up against the whole hippie movement thing kind of felt like a mistake to me. Not that I didn't get what they were kind of driving towards, but it just felt sort of in the wrong step with Gene Roddenberry's vision. But what did redeem it for me is, as we kind of got further into the episode and stuff kind of unfolded as to, what the goals were and what the idea was, I realized this is just a soft run of Star Trek V. And I like Star Trek V. And that kind of won it back for me, because it's the same story, really. Eden is even mentioned in Star Trek V. And it's sort of the same result, except there's no giant head floating in the sky. It's just a toxic place. And it kind of sold it for me. I'm like, okay, so the one thing I still don't really like is that the subtext of, the hippie drive towards, a peaceful utopia is actually a toxic wasteland. I don't like what that kind of implies, but at the same time, it's not untrue. So it also kind of, I like it, but I don't like it. I've gone back and forth whether this is a win for me or if this is a loss, or I kind of meander. It's thought-provoking. I would have liked to see DC Fontana's vision a little more clearly. I think the rewrites muddied this. I also really, truly hate it, and I mean, I don't mean to alienate Bollywood fans or, several billion people that enjoy Bollywood movies, but I hate overlaid musical interludes. I know you want that perfect sound. It's so much better when it feels real, and I go back to like watching old Ed Sullivan, where what's her name from the Mamas and the Papas is eating a banana because she didn't want to lip sync on live TV. I feel that. I mean, Flea just did that at the Super Bowl because they had to play to a tape at that, so he's just goofing off on stage. I don't like that. I want something real. You know, if I'm going to get music in something, I want it to be done by the cast. I don't want to feel like it's been overlaid and it had to be perfect. I also don't want whatever Into the Woods was. That movie was terrible, and I will go on record by saying that you should never watch it. It was awful. I know that's a little bit of an aside, but I'm fairly passionate about movies where the music ruins the rest of the movie. This is kind of the same thing. Get that whole musical portion to it. Like, I get what they were trying to do, but it sort of ruined the whole episode. Mostly because the lyrics really didn't lend themselves to the moment. It was just like a song, and it wasn't really like hypnotizing anybody. It wasn't selling a point. It was just sort of a song that they just like, here, sing this. And it was okay, but it really didn't add anything. And all it really did was kind of take away from what could have been operative dialogue. And Star Trek is about the story.
Compare that to the Strange New Worlds musical episode that we enjoyed in season 2 of that show, where they like went out and hired like Broadway style, lyricists and so forth to do that. I mean, I'm no offense to
Big
Arthur,
difference.
yeah, to Arthur Heineman in this one, but it's just like you can see the difference. Star Trek fans, Warp Core fans, if you go and check out Strange New Worlds hit on it. And
Exactly.
they just wrapped their arms around it. They were full-blown musical. It wasn't just a couple of... So...
Yeah. And it didn't take away from the episode. That was the thing, is like this was sort of almost forced into the episode in a couple of spots, and it's like, why are they suddenly breaking out into song? Like, it doesn't fit with the theme they're going with. It doesn't really highlight what I think they're trying to do, and that's where I have big problems. Although I will say, and I know some people really like this, but the Klingon rap part of the Strange New Worlds episode was awful. I know it was supposed to be awful because they're deeply embarrassed about it, but it really almost ruined that whole episode. So I'm just throwing it out there. Don't do that again. But for this episode's sake, like the rest of it really wasn't too bad. You get a megalomaniacal sort of pseudo-cult leader who they could have fleshed out some sort of evil intention, or even like a Cybok version, some sort of good intention that just goes horribly wrong. And that's where I think Star Trek V did this right, and this soft run kind of taught them all the things not to do.
That guy must have been in a really bad boxing match, because he had the worst case of cauliflower ear I've ever seen on someone. I mean, it was just bad. Yeah, the hippie wannabe monkeys, Brady Bunch, Partridge Family episode.
Yeah, there you go.
The struggle was real. I cannot stand the voiceover singing. The pretending of playing the instruments was just horrible. It was bad. Probably not as bad as other episodes, because I think you're right. When you boil down the episode, it's got good pieces there. It's got a good sci-fi intention, but man, getting there from A to B is a struggle for me. The entire episode. I did like the Pavel thing. I did like the Herbert, or like Spock understanding their language. That was kind of weird, but okay, I kind of liked it, I guess.
Keep driving.
Yeah, right. Yeah, totally. It's an airplane vibe. I wanted to like it, but looking from this perspective, we could see why things are trailing off, right? I mean, we could see why it's going to take the path it's going to go. We see that the effort by the network just wasn't there, which is interesting, because I think we see this a lot in TV series where it seems to peak, Twin Peaks, and they'll be on the cover of TV Guide, and everyone's into that TV show at that time, and then something happens. Maybe that's the jumping the shark moment, and the next thing you know, the show's canceled. It's just that seems to be what happened here with the original series. You know, it had its peak. I think there were at least one TV guide where it had the two of them on there, I believe, for it, and then we get to this kind of stuff. It's almost like they were trying to appeal to that audience to bring in viewers. It felt like to me, to fit in with that whole. I mean, isn't that why they brought in the Chekhov character, was to be the monkeys? Well, what was his name? The little dude from the monkeys.
Oh, not Mickey Dolenz. That was the lead singer. Shoot, I don't remember all my monkeys.
I know, but you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah. No,
Davy
right.
Jones. No, Danny.
Yeah. Davy Jones? Could be
Davy Jones. I think it was
Davy
right?
Jones. Yep,
Yeah.
Davy Jones.
Like, because he was kind of the in type of person. I felt that's what Chekhov was supposed to be. Was
He was
the
supposed
young
to be the heartthrob, yeah.
kid,
And
right?
then everybody jumped on Scotty's bandwagon, and they're like, "What's happening here?
That
Well,
rugged
no,
Scott.
you're supposed to like this guy."
Yeah. So strip all that other stuff off, and it's probably a good sci-fi episode. But the problem is, all that stuff was on there, so that's what made it the struggle that I had there. So yeah, good.
Speaking of struggle, real quick, the exasperation on Chapel's face as she has to treat these people, that was just beautiful. And that communicated that sort of contempt that authority figures had for the hippie movement. Like, you could see, like, oh, these guys are animals and they don't follow orders or they can't, they're just, And that was interesting because that was sort of the establishment view of what was going on. Whereas if you were on the other side of that divide, then it's always like, these guys are squares and, they won't let us do anything and fight the power. So I thought that was actually communicated quite well. Before we've had like Scotty or other crew members like speak of disdain and all that. But like I say, Chapel, like, she just nails it. She just kind of like rolls her eyes like, oh, all right, you're next. Like, I don't want to do this, but that's
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so interesting because everything that Starfleet is established to be to this point is like the goal of the actual hippie movement, right? They want a cooperative, sort of moneyless society that, ventures forth into exploration and peaceful missions and so on and so forth. And then you get this like actual hippie movement on the show, and they're like, "Brr, brr, damn hippies," and it's like, oh, come on, like it really seems to run contrary to what Star Trek was, but it also brings up kind of a good point if you're looking at this from a historical context of like, there's a reason why this didn't work in the moment. Like, there was a reason why the hippie movement kind of got off the rails, and it's because there was some misguided, megalomaniacal leaders that emerged. Charles Manson, maybe you could look at, and that's kind of where, and of course, everybody in this hippie commune basically dies from eating the fruit, drinking the Kool-Aid, Jim Jones, whatever you want to call it. Like, there's some real good cautionary tale. Like I said, I think it's the execution that ruined this for me. But I agree with Lord Uther. I think there's a good sci-fi episode here. If you get through some of the chaff, there's just a lot of chaff to sort through. It's the weakest yield of wheat we've seen in a while. That being said, I mean, I don't think we can necessarily rank it amongst the worst Star Trek episodes, but it does beg the question of where does this fall in the Warp Core ratings list? Fert Derby, you seem positive about this episode. How did you feel this one turned out?
I think this is 4 3/4. Like, I don't think it can push. I think 5 and above, we've always said, is really good Trek. And I think, as you say, as much as I want to just excise and do a director's cut of this episode with no musical interludes, that's not my position. But it brushes up against being solid Trek. And I see all of the ingredients in there. The cake just didn't quite rise to the top based on what we've been saying. So 4 3/4, kind of like something you'd catch it for the Hogwarts Express. It's got to be measured in fractions here. And that's where I'm going.
And Lord Uther?
It's a 4. I mean, I thought I was going to rank it lower than that, but after we've talked through it a little bit, which, by the way, a lot of times these feel like therapy sessions for me with some of these episodes. So, with that being said, I think 4 is a good enough score for this
Four's
one.
enough.
Yeah, 4 is enough. Yeah, I'm riding with Lord Uther on this one. I want to rank it higher, I really do, but there's enough that I had to like set aside to actually find enjoyment here that it does feel more like a 4 than anything more than that. Great bones, great warm up for Star Trek V, which I think did this well. And even that wasn't a perfectly executed movie, as we all have from Warp Core 5. If you haven't seen that, dig into our archives. Make sure you subscribe, like, and drop us a comment with how you felt about this episode. I'd love to see a version of this rebooted. I think this is one, and there's not a lot of these where I want them just completely like recon. I feel like this is one that Strange New Worlds could tackle and really bring some modern sensibility to, and probably execute this in something, a manner more faithful to what DC Fontana was looking at. I don't know. There's so much on the table with Trek that I feel like even though this one didn't quite hit the mark, there's no reason why later Trek couldn't adapt it to something just as effective or better. So we'll see. We still have a few episodes left, like you said, 4 in season 3 to go. We are winding down this original series quite quickly, and we still have not seen a couple of the most famous season 3 episodes. So stay tuned, pending rebrand fans. And if it's your first time taking in the Warp Core podcast, highly recommend you jump into those archives. We have a whole Warp Core podcast playlist on our channel page, and it's totally free to subscribe. You can drop us a like, you can drop us a comment. Maybe you disagree with anything we're saying. Maybe you just want to say, "What's up, Lord Uther?" You can do that anytime, any place, right here on YouTube, pending rebrand. We are the Warp Core Podcast, and until next time, we say to you, live long and prosper.